Welcome back to CARDESIGN.ACADEMY. Today I'm continuing my series on rendering automotive interiors using a 3D model screenshot. In this case, a Italian sports car interior that I designed in Gravity Sketch. This is a technique that I use to give a screenshot a much more illustrated, sketched quality to it. Gives it a bit of artistry and emotional quality. So as I'm doing this, I'm taking the original data layer and I'm just giving it some transparency so I can do a quick overlay sketch. In this particular view, I'm focusing in on the steering wheel and gauge cluster as the center focal point, really trying to get into the details of that driving interface. This vehicle is really all about the driving experience and being a driver-focused, cockpit-like interior inspired by F1 cars. Sketching in the door trim and the detail of the door release. Sketching in an A-pillar now to give the sense of where the driver sits in the vehicle and its outward visibility. Adding some additional detail to the door trim area with this sort of diamond stitch pattern. Gives it kind of a classical look in an otherwise very, very modern and futuristic interior. As you can see, I also sketched a shadow of the steering wheel being projected onto the floor. So now I'm taking my original data layer, bringing back the opacity, actually leaving it slightly transparent. And I also duplicated the layer so I can zero in on that focal point and give it the maximum amount of contrast and let everything else sort of fade out just a little bit. Now I'm blocking in the cast shadows. Cast shadows really give a lot of dimension to the image. So here's where the steering wheel is projecting that shadow onto the floor and onto the lower part of the door. It's also important to help visually reseed the footwell underneath the instrument panel. There's a shadow for the paddle shifters. I'm just adding some additional shadow definition in these part layers. So where the steering binnacle is overlapped, where the door panels overlap the main door surface, there's going to be a small cast shadow. And the distance of that shadow really helps to define the amount of offset between these different layered parts. So now I'm filling in that A-pillar surface. Now I'm just adding a little bit of fade on the outer edges of that A-pillar to give it a sense of section. And now I'm sketching out a cast shadow, a subtle cast shadow that the A-pillar would be projecting onto the door surface. So as the A-pillar shadow projects itself over these various components. You see the shadow sort of zig and zag a little bit. Then I'm putting some extra cast shadows on the steering wheel, just to give that some added depth and dimension. Same thing with the overall instrument binnacle trim. Now I'm adding some dark airbrush to really recede that footwell area underneath the instrument panel. I'm just taking the eraser and cleaning up the edge of the steering wheel and the instrument cluster. Now I'm starting to add some additional depth to the surface of the door trim. Also adding a new layer in which I'm going to start adding some white airbrush to highlight some areas and give them a greater sense of shape and form, starting with the instrument binnacle. Binnacle is a term I use for the area that surrounds the gauges. Also putting an extra highlight on the steering wheel to really make that steering wheel pop. As you can see, it sort of changes direction in the lower half of the wheel. It sort of angles itself outward. Next, I'm adding some additional lighting on the gauge cluster, on the trim piece surrounding the gauge cluster, again to give that some additional shape and form. What's nice is working over data is that all of the hard work of setting up perspectives and setting up all of the details and proportioning and sectioning the light and shadow and even the color, it's all been set up already in the data. So I'm really just adding a bit of artistic embellishment in order to bring about a more emotional sketch-like quality. And so here I've taken a texture brush, and as you can see I'm starting to add some noise to some of the surfaces to give it that very tactile, textured look that interiors have. Then I'm just going in with a white pencil and highlighting some various areas in order to bring out the sectioning and add a bit of artistry and flavor. You know, just kissing those top edges with a white pencil gives it a much more dimensional quality and really helps to add additional definition to some of the shapes and forms. The other thing that's great about working in data is the ability to take a lot of screenshots and find the best composition, page composition and perspective that really tells the story. So in this case I did 3 views, 2 overhead views and this one close-up view of the steering wheel and gauge cluster. You can see that paddle shifter right behind the steering wheel as well, which has this really sculpted quality. You can see everything is just getting a much more highlighted, dimensional, sketched quality to it now. I really like working this way because it frees me up to really discover the spatial quality of the interior as I'm designing it three-dimensionally. And these images are just it's a great way to generate these types of images very quickly. Thanks for watching, and come back again soon to check out the next demo, which will be another aerial view of this sports car interior.